Imagine you're a global investor. You're scanning the headlines coming out of Beijing. The annual Central Economic Work Conference is just wrapped up, and the official readout hits your screen. And the language feels familiar, almost like a replay, Continue to implement a more proactive fiscal policy, moderately loose monetary policy, domestic demand-led growth. It reads as steady, predictable, a real sign of continuity. You might even feel a sense of reassurance. But then your eye catches a different detail, something buried in the procedural reporting. One name is conspicuously absent from the list of attendees, Ma Xingrui, the Politburo member and former party boss of Xinjiang. He was also missing from a key Politburo meeting just a few weeks before, and there's no explanation given. In the meticulously choreographed world of Chinese high-level politics, where every single seat and sequence is loaded with meaning. Well, an absence like this isn't just a scheduling conflict, it's a silent tremor, something running just beneath the polished surface of the official consensus. So here we have it. A public narrative projecting stability and policy continuity, set against this backdrop of unexplained high-level political absence. This stark contrast between the repetitive, reassuring economic script and the unsettling quiet around a missing senior figure, that frames a real story. And begs the question, what deeper currents are flowing beneath this calm, familiar surface, and what do they signal about the challenges ahead?
That is precisely the tension we are here to unpack today. You have this global narrative of, intended stability, yet the geopolitical landscape is anything but stable. It's defined by U.S. tariffs, rising protectionism, and fragmented global trade. So our mission for this deep dive is to decode what continuity and stability actually mean, not just in Beijing's script, but in a really crucial regional player, Malaysia. This is a country that is actively and I would say strategically positioning itself to be resilient in this highly uncertain environment.
It's fascinating because Malaysia isn't just reacting, are they? It seems like they're attempting a massive structural shift while navigating these global headwinds.
Exactly. Malaysia is undertaking a significant, a really high stakes overhaul. It's happening through its Economy Madani framework and the subsequent roadmap, the 13th Malaysia Plan, which runs from 2026 through 2030. They are signaling a very, very clear determination to build resilience against external shocks, things like global uncertainties and tariff wars, and, moving away from being purely an assembly hub to a high-value producer.
And the targets they've set are incredibly ambitious. It feels like they're signaling a real transformation in their global economic standing.
The goals are indeed aggressive. Malaysia wants to climb the global rankings, and significantly so. They're aiming to become one of the top 30 largest economies in the world. And to put that in perspective, as of 2025, their GDP stood at about $422 billion. That placed them 36th globally.
Okay, so moving from 36th to 30th is not a small jump.
Not at all. It requires sustained, above-average growth and substantial structural investment. It's not a trivial leap by any means. This isn't just about weathering the storm. It's about using this moment of global fragmentation to fundamentally improve their position.
But as you pointed out, it's not just about the size of the economy, right? It's about the quality and efficiency of that growth, the competitiveness factor.
That's the core of the Economy Madani vision. The focus is heavily on institutional and policy reforms to enhance competitiveness. And we've seen some preliminary signs that these reforms are already, paying dividends. Malaysia's competitiveness ranking jumped 11 places to 23rd in the 2025 IMD rankings.
Wow, 11 places is a big move.
It is. And the ultimate stretch goal for the 13th plan is to hit the top 12 in global competitiveness by 2030. These two benchmarks, top 30 economy, top 12 competitiveness, they're the barometers they're using. To achieve that top 12 ranking, they have to prove that investments in areas like human capital, governance, advanced digital infrastructure, and particularly semiconductors and AI, are globally effective.
This sets a very high bar. So let's unpack this a bit. If the prevailing global environment is defined by U.S. tariffs and geopolitical volatility, the very factors driving China's desire for domestic stability, how is Malaysia's macroeconomic management designed to stabilize growth and, reassure regional financial markets? This management of fiscal and monetary policy is key for any investor looking at ASEAN right now. Capital flight can be a major risk.
They are employing a very clear two-pronged stabilization approach. It's strict fiscal discipline paired with a flexible countercyclical monetary policy. And these two levers, they're being managed in tandem to project confidence. Let's start with the central bank actions, because those are crucial for regional financial analysts looking at the ringgit's strength and interest rate arbitrage opportunity.
Okay, so the monetary policy for 2025-2026, it seems to be prioritizing stability above all else, but with a growth tilt.
Exactly. The central bank's goal is to maintain price stability while actively supporting growth. And we saw a very specific and I think very telling action recently. In July 2025, the Bank Negara Malaysia lowered the overnight policy rate, the OPR, by 25 basis points, moving it from 3.00% down to 2.75%.
So lowering the OPR, which for our listeners is essentially the main lever the central bank uses to manage lending costs, that signals a very specific confidence level. Why was this labeled as preemptive?
That is the critical word. It wasn't reactive. They weren't responding to a crisis or a sharp drop in inflation. It was done preemptively to sustain steady growth amid external uncertainties, coupled with moderate domestic inflation prospects. This move signals two things to the market. First, the central bank believes underlying domestic demand is strong enough to handle a slight easing.
Okay.
And second, they are taking insurance against external shocks, making sure credit remains affordable for businesses and consumers should the global situation worsen. It's a calculated move. It's designed to signal management flexibility and confidence.
And beyond the primary rate, what about liquidity in the banking system itself?
Liquidity management was also addressed with a similar easing tone. The statutory reserve requirement ratio, the SRR, was reduced earlier in May 2025. It dropped from 2.00% to 1.00%.
So what does that do in simple terms?
The SRR is the portion of deposits that banks have to hold with the central bank. So cutting it releases a substantial amount of liquidity back into the commercial banking system. It enables banks to lend more freely and support overall economic growth. This dual easing OPR and SRR, it showcases a really concerted effort to grease the wheels of domestic credit creation.
And when you look globally, especially at the U.S., the expected movement from the Federal Reserve must be playing heavily into the capital flow story, giving the ringgit a pretty significant external boost.
Absolutely. The performance of the ringgit is underpinned by sound domestic fundamentals and measures encouraging capital flows, but the external environment is highly supportive right now. The anticipation of U.S. Federal Reserve rate cuts is a massive external factor. We saw the Fed cut rates by 25 BPs in September 2025, and market analysts anticipate 2 more cuts before the end of the year.
What does that mean practically for Malaysian assets?
Well, when the U.S. dollar weakens against a basket of currencies and U.S. yields decline, assets in resilient Asian debt markets like Malaysian government securities, or MGS, they become significantly more appealing, especially to institutional investors who are looking for yield.
Right.
We saw sustained foreign demand and yield declines across all tenures in the MGS market during the first 7 months of 2025. And on top of that, stability projected for China, which is Malaysia's largest trading partner, provides an additional layer of certainty. It makes Malaysia look like a secure, high-yield alternative within the region.
So that's the monetary side, flexible, preemptive, and benefiting from global rate expectations. How does the fiscal commitment align with this narrative of stability and, more importantly, governance?
The fiscal commitment is really centered on transparency, sustainability, and legal reinforcement, especially under the 13th Plan's framework. Budget 2025 allocated RM 421 billion in total. That was balanced between RM 335 billion for operating expenditure, the day-to-day costs, and RM 86 billion for development, so long-term infrastructure and capital projects. For 2026, they're projecting robust growth between 4% and 4.5%, anchored by resilient domestic demand.
And the structural shift in fiscal policy seems to be focusing on governance improvement. This has to be key to achieving that goal of climbing the Corruption Perception Index rankings.
It is the core structural shift. The enactment of the Government Procurement Bill 2025 is a critical piece of legislation. In the past, the lack of a standardized procurement law often led to inflated costs, delays, and a perception of favoritism or weak oversight in public spending. This new bill is designed to mandate transparency, set clear standards for tenders, and ensure that public spending actually delivers value for money. It's about building institutional trust, proving that the state's budget is being managed responsibly.
That institutional trust directly supports the long-term goal of fiscal sustainability, which often means, tightening the belt.
Absolutely. They're reinforcing fiscal responsibility with the 13th Plan, targeting a fiscal deficit below 3% to GDP. That is a crucial line in the sand. And this commitment is legally backed not only by the Procurement Bill, but also by the Fiscal Responsibility Act 850, which sets specific parameters and accountability mechanisms for government debt and deficits.
And what's particularly notable is the tough political decision they're making regarding subsidies. Broad subsidies are usually sacred cows in developing economies.
They are tackling that political challenge head-on. The government is moving decisively away from broad, untargeted subsidies to specific programs. And this commitment is projected to cause expenditure on subsidies and incentives to decline significantly by 38.5% in 2026. This is primarily due to the implementation of subsidy targeting, specifically the BUDI 95 targeted subsidy program for RN95 fuel.
So how does a program like BUDI 95 work in practice, and why is that shift so politically difficult?
Well, in essence, BUDI 95 moves the subsidy mechanism from subsidizing the fuel itself, which benefits everyone, including the wealthy, to subsidizing the individual who genuinely needs the support. It involves identifying eligible groups, usually based on income thresholds, and providing them with direct cash assistance or maybe a specific subsidy card to offset the difference between the subsidized and market price of fuel.
And the political difficulty.
It's immense because the perception of cheaper fuel is a massive short-term electoral win. Removing that requires effective communication and demonstrating that the targeted aid is sufficient, equitable, and delivered efficiently to the intended low-income recipients. But fiscally, this move is vital for long-term budget health. It frees up capital for crucial development projects.
Now let's confront the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
U.S. tariffs. We know global fragmentation is happening, and Malaysia is geographically caught between the U.S. and China. Can you quantify the specific drag these trade barriers will place on Malaysia's immediate economic outlook?
The quantification is stark, and it really highlights Malaysia's vulnerability as an open, trade-dependent economy to external shocks that aren't even directly aimed at them. The U.S. tariff impositions, which went into effect on August 1st, 2025, they've reduced Malaysia's most favored nation rate from 25% down to 19%.
Which is a relative win compared to some neighbors, I imagine.
It is. Myanmar and Lao PDR face a 40% rate, but it's still significantly higher than a trading hub like Singapore, which sits at 10%.
So how much of a GDP reduction are we actually looking at for 2025 and 2026?
For the remaining part of 2025, the tariffs are estimated to reduce Malaysia's real GDP by 0.38 percentage points. But here is the critical distinction that investors need to grasp: the direct impact. The effect of tariffs directly hitting Malaysian exports is small, only 0.07 percentage points. The indirect impact is massive. It's coming in at 0.31 percentage points.
Wait, 0.31. That means the indirect damage is 4 times larger than the direct damage. Why is the indirect effect so dominant?
It's because Malaysia's total trade with the rest of the world, beyond the immediate U.S.-China axis, accounts for over 80% of its total trade. Malaysia sits smack in the middle of the global supply chain, particularly for high-tech components. So when the U.S. places tariffs on Chinese-assembled goods, the demand for the Malaysian-made components that go into those products, like specialized electrical and electronic components, rubber products, or basic assembly materials, that demand decreases dramatically. Malaysia is highly exposed to the trade pass-through effects from tariff hikes against China.
So you're saying the trade war is effectively taxing Malaysia's component manufacturers indirectly, even if Washington and Beijing aren't actively thinking about Kuala Lumpur when they design the tariffs.
Precisely. And the full-year effect in 2026 is projected to be worse, as the tariffs will have a full 12 months to filter through the entire global value chain. The tariffs are anticipated to reduce Malaysia's GDP growth by a total of 0.76 percentage points in 2026.
And the indirect effect.
It swells to 0.61 percentage points, vastly overshadowing the direct 0.15 hit. And beyond that, Malaysia's exports of goods and services are expected to decrease by 1.38 percentage points in 2026, which underlines the depth of the challenge. This quantitative risk assessment, it really underscores why the 13th plan is so focused on internal demand and structural transformation. They know they cannot rely solely on a benign external trade environment.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me. If external trade faces these measurable headwinds from tariffs, domestic demand becomes absolutely critical to meeting that 4 to 4.5% growth target for 2026. So what specific policy tools are being used right now to boost household spending? They have to put money directly into consumers' pockets to offset that trade drag.
The strategy is a maximalist approach. They're using direct aid and structural wage adjustments to maximize disposable income across several layers of the population. This is the heart of the short-term stabilization strategy, centered on social equity under the Economy Madani vision.
Okay, let's start with the immediate aid.
On the aid front, Budget 2025 allocated RM13 billion for the STR and SARA cash aid programs. These are robust social safety nets that benefit approximately 9 million recipients in total, with 5.4 million receiving the additional SARA benefits, which often cover essentials like food and electricity.
But there was an additional, very sizable cash injection aimed at immediate, broad-based stimulus earlier this year, wasn't there? That's the classic move when you need to spur consumption quickly.
Correct. There was a massive one-off payment initiative in July 2025, the Penghargan-Sera RM100 one-off. RM2 billion was allocated for this, benefiting a staggering 22 million Malaysians aged 18 or above. And the speed and efficiency of the disbursement are noteworthy. It utilized seamless MyCAD-linked payments.
That's a clever policy detail.
Yeah.
Using the MyCAD, the national ID card links the payment directly to the individual. It bypasses potential bureaucratic bottlenecks or the need for people to sign up for yet another government scheme. It ensures comprehensive outreach and immediate delivery, meaning the money hits bank accounts almost instantly.
Exactly. This is direct fiscal expansion designed to spur consumption quickly and broadly. It acts as a perfect countercyclical tool to cushion the public against rising external costs and inflation.
Beyond direct handouts, how are structural changes in income impacting consumption? I'm thinking about the public sector wages here, which often have a massive spillover effect on private sector wage expectations and overall confidence.
That's right. Consumer spending is set to receive further impetus from the full implementation of salary adjustments under Phase 2 of the Public Service Remuneration System, the SSPA. And this is not a small adjustment. It's a significant fiscal expansion. It's projected to drive public expenditure growth by 4.4% in 2026, and that contribution alone is estimated to add 0.8 percentage points to overall GDP growth.
To realize 0.8 percentage points of GDP growth just from public sector wages is a huge leverage point. It provides sustained income growth and ensures favorable employment prospects for a substantial portion of the workforce.
And when you couple that with the SGR-SERA programs, this sustained income and favorable employment environment is projected to result in 5.4% growth in private consumption in 2026. This is the robust domestic engine keeping the economy running despite global trade friction.
Okay, let's transition to the minimum wage policy. That's a cornerstone of ensuring dignified living conditions and preventing the domestic consumption base from eroding at the bottom. The policy has been formalized for some time, but what is the current state and what does the data tell us about its impact on business behavior and productivity?
Well, the policy journey started decades ago, but the modern minimum wage was introduced as a major step to guarantee basic income for low-wage earners nationwide. The implementation, however, has revealed key challenges, primarily related to compliance, particularly among smaller firms which often operate with tighter margins.
And the numbers here are quite jarring.
They are. Internal analyses show that 23.4% of establishments, that's nearly 1 in 4, were non-compliant with the required minimum wage rate, and the vast majority of these, 91.3%, were micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs.
Wow.
While the average non-compliance rate across all employers is around 9%, the concentration in the MSME sector is a serious issue.
Wait, 23.4% non-compliant in the MSME sector. That's nearly 1 in 4 businesses shortchanging their lowest paid workers. How is the government planning to practically address that huge gap with enhanced monitoring, which was a policy recommendation?
Well, that gap defeats the fundamental purpose of the policy, which is to lift the bottom rung of earners. The solution involves strengthening monitoring and governance by leveraging digital-based reporting systems. The idea is to move compliance checks from, physical inspections to digital verification of payroll data, making it harder for firms to underreport. And at the same time, the focus is on providing targeted support to MSMEs, perhaps incentives or tax breaks, to help them absorb the initial shock of the increased wage floor, rather than simply punishing non-compliance.
But the minimum wage isn't just a welfare measure. You mentioned it's linked to productivity gains. How does a required pay increase actually encourage productivity in a firm?
The empirical analysis, including studies conducted within Malaysia's own manufacturing sector, supports the theory that raising the minimum wage encourages firms to substitute cheap, low-skilled labor with automation and technology.
Ah, okay.
When labor costs rise, the incentive to invest in a machine that can do the work of 3 people without demanding a salary increase or benefits becomes much stronger. The National Wages Consultative Council reports confirm that the majority of employers maintained and even improved automation and technology usage after the minimum wage was implemented. It forces a structural upgrade.
So, the minimum wage acts as an accelerator for technological adoption, even if it doesn't solve the long-standing dependency on foreign workers alone, which still requires specific policy intervention.
It does. And on the issue of foreign labor, which is a major point of contention for many Malaysian industries, reforms are accelerating, specifically the multi-tiered levy system. This system is designed to charge a higher levy for companies that employ a disproportionately high share of low-skilled foreign labor. The goal is twofold: to formalize a large portion of the informal employment sector, which currently represents 19.8% of employment, and to make reliance on low-skilled foreign workers economically punitive enough to push employers toward higher value activities and automation.
Shifting away from labor dependence also requires addressing the structural barriers that keep domestic talent out of the workforce. This brings us back to the priority placed on the care economy and female labor participation.
Precisely. Continuing the thread of social inclusion and labor reform, Budget 2026 heavily prioritizes the care economy. This means enhancing community-based support, improving household care services, and specifically expanding quality, affordable childcare services. And the goal is highly strategic: to reduce employment barriers for women and actively encourage greater female labor force participation.
What's the specific target there?
The key Economy Madani target is 60% female labor force participation. To hit that, the state must functionally solve the burden of childcare and elder care, which traditionally falls on women. By investing RM 14.4 billion in public-private partnership projects, they are building the infrastructure that enables productive labor.
Can you give us a few examples of those major infrastructure projects? They contribute not just to GDP, but to national capacity and regional balancing.
Yes, the allocations are significant and geographically targeted. We see projects like the construction of Hospital Sultana Amina II addressing critical healthcare needs. Then there are key expressways like the West Ipoh Span Expressway, YZEN, West Coast Expressway, WCE, which enhance logistics and internal trade efficiency. Beyond those, there's a massive RM 37.5 billion allocation for broader regional development focused on transport, the green economy, and advanced manufacturing across different states. This includes the highly visible Johor-Singapore Rapid Transit System link, which will integrate the regional labor markets of southern Malaysia and Singapore, the expansion of the Kulim High-Tech Park in the northern region, and renewable energy ventures like the Kenyur Hybrid Hydro-Floating Solar Farm. All of this is aimed at balancing regional development and ensuring equitable access to amenities, which is critical for long-term social and economic stability.
So the structural plan is clear. Stabilize the bottom rung with subsidies and wages, and then provide the physical infrastructure and social support like childcare to free up labor and maximize productivity.
It's a comprehensive approach to internally generate the growth necessary to offset the external trade drag.
Now we come to the true transformation. The economic plan signals a deep structural transformation, moving beyond just boosting consumption to fundamentally upgrading its industrial base. Malaysia isn't just seeking stability, it's seeking to shift to high-value, innovation-led growth. What are the pillars of this structural shift, and how does this aim to create new opportunities in technology manufacturing, especially when we consider its regional partners like Vietnam and Thailand?
This high-value shift is encapsulated primarily in the new Industrial Master Plan 2030, or MP 2030, and the aggressive national effort to become an AI-driven nation. The NEM 2030 is fundamentally designed to elevate the manufacturing sector, aiming for a 6.5% annual increase in value-added output to reach RM 587.5 billion by 2030. This is a philosophical shift away from relying solely on foreign direct investment for low-cost assembly and toward creating indigenous technology champions by upskilling the existing workforce.
But structural reform needs substantial seed capital, right? Especially to pull in private investment toward riskier higher tech industries. How is that shift being financed in the near term?
The government allocated RM 1131.5 million in Budget 2025 as seed funding for the Strategic Co-Investment Fund, or COSIF. This fund is explicitly proposed to de-risk and facilitate investments in high-value industries like advanced semiconductors, massive data centers, and specialized cloud computing infrastructure. By the end of August 2025, COSIF had already attracted investments totaling RM 25 billion, proving its initial success in mobilizing capital. This is targeted capital intervention focused squarely on advanced industries, particularly the electrical and E&E cluster.
And that E&E focus is crucial because it strengthens Malaysia's position in the global supply chain. That ripple effect inevitably impacts intra-Asian trade, connecting directly to ecosystems in neighbors like Thailand and Vietnam who also aspire to move up the value chain.
That's right. The E&E sector remains the key growth driver, supported by the National Semiconductor Strategy, or NSS. The NSS focuses on attracting investments in wafer fabrication, advanced packaging, and IC design. moving beyond Malaysia's traditional strength in back-end testing and assembly. This structural push makes Malaysia a more resilient node in the global chip ecosystem, particularly important in a fragmented world where buyers want geographical diversity.
But let's talk about AI, the true frontier, and the stated goal of becoming an AI-driven nation by 2030. What does that structural readiness look like, and what are the immediate challenges?
It starts with a comprehensive governance framework, which is being guided by the forthcoming National AI Action Plan 2030. And interestingly, Malaysia has actually performed relatively well in setting the policy foundation. Analyses like the Stanford AI Index 2024 and the Oxford Government AI Readiness Index highlight strong foundational elements in vision, governance, ethics, and digital capacity. The policy framework is largely in place.
So the governance structure is solid, which is a good starting point. But what about the actual capacity for implementation and adoption? What are the key practical gaps that the National AI Office is mandated to overcome?
The National AI Office, NAIO, is mandated to accelerate adoption across all sectors, particularly in public services, the GovTech initiatives. For Budget 2026, this means leveraging AI and big data analytics for improved public service decision-making and efficiency, specifically GovTech initiatives like My Digital ID and My Visa 2.0.
Can you elaborate on what, say, My Visa 2.0 specifically optimizes?
My Visa 2.0 is an excellent example. It uses AI and data analytics to streamline the entire visa application and processing process. Instead of manual, often slow verification of documents and background checks, the system can use algorithms to assess risk profiles and automatically flag applications that require deeper human review.
Okay, so it speeds things up.
It speeds up immigration processing, improves security, and critically makes it easier for foreign investment and high-skilled talent to enter the country, directly supporting the NUMI 2030's need for specialized labor.
That's a clear efficiency gain. But you mentioned persistent gaps. Where does this strategy start to lag?
The challenge lies in strengthening ecosystem maturity across the board. The two biggest gaps are persistent infrastructure deficiencies and data integration problems. First, infrastructure. Limited rural network access is a moderate achievement according to international indices, but it impedes training and education. If rural areas lack reliable, high-speed connectivity, you cannot develop the nationwide talent pool necessary for an AI-driven economy.
Right.
Second, data integration. Integrated data systems lag. Government departments and agencies often operate in data silos. You can't run effective AI models on public service delivery or make data-driven decisions on budget allocation if you don't have seamless integrated data systems connecting agencies. The government is aware of this and is prioritizing investment in digital infrastructure and strengthening the domestic innovation ecosystem to foster closer collaboration between researchers, universities, and industry to close these two gaps.
I see the push for technological modernity.
Yeah.
But parallel to that, Malaysia is also reinforcing its leadership in green finance and Islamic capital markets. How did that fit into the structural overhaul? Is this a bid to capture specialized global capital?
It absolutely is. It positions Malaysia as a reliable, transparent destination for sustainable, responsible, and crucially long-term capital that values stability and governance. This push harmonizes local standards with global expectations. Look at the ESG push. The National Sustainability Reporting Framework, the NSRF, was launched in September 2024. It's fully aligned with the International IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards, which incorporate the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, recommendations.
Why is this alignment with global IFRS standards and TTFD so important?
Because it's regulatory harmonization, which is a huge capital magnet. It tells massive institutional investors in New York or London who are mandated to use these global standards that they can drop Malaysian bonds and equity into their global ESG portfolios without needing to recalculate risk or translate complex local requirements. It makes Malaysian companies immediately legible and trustworthy on climate risk and governance.
And they're being strict about compliance timelines.
Yes. Climate-related disclosures aligned with TCFD are mandated for main market-listed issuers starting December 2025. And furthermore, realizing that SMEs are crucial to the supply chain and often the weak link in ESG compliance, the ASEAN Simplified ESG Disclosure Guide was introduced in 2025.
That makes sense.
This guide consolidates complex international frameworks into 38 essential disclosures to help small and medium enterprises with their reporting. That attention to detail, from major listed companies to the MSMEs in the supply chain, shows how integrated and serious this governance strategy is.
And that focus on ethical finance reinforces Malaysia's historical dominance in Islamic capital markets.
It truly does. Malaysia retained the top position on the Islamic Finance Development Index, IFDI 2024, for the 12th consecutive year. The Islamic capital market, the ICM, has grown substantially. It now represents 64% of the total capital market size.
Was that a niche market?
Not at all. It is the majority of their capital market. Furthermore, Malaysia commands 33.9% of the global sukuk outstanding, making it one of the world's largest sukuk markets.
And this leadership role is specifically being leveraged for sustainable development goals.
Precisely through sustainable and responsible investment, or SRI sukuk. Malaysia has actively issued SRI sukuk to fund projects in areas like quality education, affordable housing, green buildings, and clean energy. This ties ethical finance directly to national development goals and provides a unique value proposition for global capital seeking both Sharia compliance and verifiable sustainable returns. This dual focus on advanced technology and ethical, transparent finance creates a very clear, sophisticated value proposition for global capital.
Now, given Malaysia's focus on high-value industry, it's essential to look at the regional competitor that absolutely shaped the global manufacturing landscape over the last decade. Let's pivot back to China and evaluate the decade-long success of its industrial blueprint, Made in China 2025, or MIC 2025. What did they achieve and where did they fall short? Understanding this is critical for assessing the competitive pressure on Malaysia.
MIC 2025 was a comprehensive, state-mobilized strategy to turn China into a manufacturing powerhouse, moving it rapidly up the global value chain. After a decade, the results are undeniable. China is demonstrably more innovative, has solidified its status as the world's industrial hub, and met or exceeded targets in about half of the 10 focus sectors.
So where they succeeded, the commitment of state resources was overwhelming, leading to global dominance.
Exactly. China-based firms accounted for nearly 1/4 of the global growth in exports related to the 10 MIC 2025 sectors between 2015 and 2023. Success largely stemmed from a strategic playbook. Consistent, long-term government financial support, mandated vertical integration of supply chains, and the tactical use of massive economies of scale.
Let's start with their biggest, most decisive success story: new energy vehicles.
The EV sector is a monumental victory for MIC 2025. The speed of growth is staggering. They hit all key NEV targets ahead of schedule. For example, the goal was to sell 3 million indigenous NEVs in 2021. They hit that goal a year early, selling 3.5 million units. By 2024, Chinese brands captured roughly 91% of the domestic market share and, critically, 62% of the global EV market share.
And the scale of growth, exemplified by a company like BYD, is truly remarkable.
It shows the raw power of state-directed capitalism. BYD sales grew from just under 70,000 units in 2015 to over 4.27 million in 2024. This success was deliberately manufactured through massive, coordinated state support.
So on both the supply and demand side.
Yes. On the supply side, firms received subsidies, grants, and extremely cheap funding. On the demand side, buyers got tax exemptions and fast-tracked registration, creating instant demand. And crucially, from 2015 to 2019, to qualify for any state subsidy, EVs were required to use Chinese-made batteries, strictly enforcing vertical integration within the supply chain and locking out foreign battery suppliers. This strategic coercion enabled China to rapidly dominate an entire emerging global industry from the raw materials up to the finished product.
But that build-out, as successful as it was, has created a major measurable problem of overcapacity, right? It's leading to trade friction and intense downward price pressures globally, which is now affecting even European and American car makers.
That is the trade-off inherent in state-directed rapid expansion. When supply is driven by policy rather than organic market demand, you quickly generate a surplus. And that surplus is now being aggressively exported into global markets, forcing competition and protectionism in return. Now let's turn to semiconductors, where the results were much more mixed. This really reflects the difficulty of overcoming highly technical barriers and US-led restrictions.
This is a sector where they poured billions into localization efforts. How did MIC 2025 fare against its localization targets?
They missed the ambitious localization target set for 2020, achieving only 16.6% self-sufficiency versus the goal of 50%. They also struggled significantly with advanced chips, those below 14 nanometers, because of U.S. export controls that tightly restrained access to cutting-edge manufacturing equipment like extreme ultraviolet lithography machines. Chinese firms are assessed to be at least 2 years behind the global cutting edge in this high-end segment, struggling to overcome the huge incumbency advantage and tightly held IP.
However, they did make significant strides in foundational chips, which, while not the most advanced, are critical components for everything from automobiles to grid technology and industrial automation.
Correct. Despite missing the localization goals for the high end, China's capacity in foundational chips, those 28 millimeters or larger, is expanding at a breathtaking speed. Their production capacity grew over 4 times faster than global demand between 2015 and 2023. Analysts project that China will account for nearly half of all new mature node capacity globally over the next 3 to 5 years.
Why does dominating the mature node market raise concern if they are lower value added?
Because of the sheer scale and potential for control. While lower value added, these chips are essential components for virtually every industry outside of high-performance computing. By flooding the market and controlling nearly half of the new mature node capacity, China gains significant leverage. This sheer scale raises significant concerns about potential monopolization in this crucial segment of the global supply chain, allowing China to potentially dictate price and supply terms for foundational components worldwide.
Okay, let's look at the sectors where state support demonstrably fell short, where they couldn't overcome established intellectual property and technical barriers. Aviation stands out immediately.
Aviation targets were largely missed, proving that complex, safety-critical systems resist rapid state-directed development. The state-owned COMAC narrow-body jet, the C919, was meant to be delivered by 2019, but the first order wasn't fulfilled until 2023. They only delivered 13 jets in 2024, meeting a mere 7% of domestic demand versus their 10% target.
And the engine components were the real tipping point.
That's the core technical issue. The goal to commercialize the indigenous CJ1000A jet engine by 2025 was missed, with the engine remaining stuck in the trial phase. Technical barriers and tight control over specialized IP for components like engines and complex flight control systems by international incumbents like Boeing, Airbus, GE, Rolls-Royce, it proved largely insurmountable. And on top of that, the jet faces massive barriers to entering global markets because it has not yet secured internationally recognized airworthiness certification from the FAA or EASA.
But the state found a workaround for the smaller regional jet, didn't it? It provided a guaranteed market.
It did. The regional C909 jet has seen better success precisely because the state stepped in. Chinese-owned airlines ceased foreign purchases of equivalent regional jets since 2015, effectively forcing competitors out of the Chinese market and insulating the C909 from market failure. The narrative changes completely when the state guarantees the buyer, but this does not prove global competitiveness, only domestic control.
What about high-end computer numerically controlled, or CNC, machines? This equipment is vital for upgrading overall manufacturing quality, regardless of the end product.
They missed their ambitious 80% domestic market share goal by 2025, capturing only roughly 33% of the overall CNC market. Foreign firms like Fanuc and Siemens dominate the high-end hardware and software, controlling 90% of the high-end ball screw market, a critical component for precision machining. Chinese companies tend to compete on cost in the low to mid-tier segment, where they dominate globally.
But they are a net exporter.
Yes, but that's the interesting part. While they struggled with indigenous innovation in the high end, the sheer volume of production means China has been a net exporter of CNC machines since 2021, often because foreign firms relocated production within China to capitalize on the lower supply chain costs.
And finally, a less-known failure point: high-end agricultural machinery. This is a surprise given China's focus on food security.
It was a priority, receiving extensive state support, but the targets were missed. They failed to achieve the 60% domestic market share goal for high-end products. Foreign brands, such as John Deere, still hold over 80% of the high-powered segment tractors, over 200 HPA, due to a perceived superiority in reliability, quality, and after-sale service. This again illustrates the difficulty of substituting foreign products when performance and long-term quality are paramount to the end user, regardless of subsidies offered for domestic alternatives. So as we draw this deep dive to a close, we've explored these two distinct competing paths to resilience. On one side, we have China's success in state-directed industrial policy through MIC 2025, which, despite massive costs and some failures, created global dominance in vertically integrated sectors like EVs. On the other, we have Malaysia's sophisticated, comprehensive strategy centered on the Economy Madani framework and the 13th Plan, designed to build resilience and structural high-value growth against the backdrop of this intense geopolitical and industrial competition.
The two paths couldn't be more different in their execution, but both are fundamentally about future-proofing their economies. Malaysia's strategy is structured not just to weather external shocks, but to fundamentally upgrade its economy while reinforcing social stability. This is why the mix of policies,
The consumption boost from the SDR-0 programs and the SSPA salary increases is so essential. It buys them the social equity and public consent needed to sustain the difficult structural reforms, like cutting fuel subsidies.
Absolutely. The commitment to legislative reforms like the Government Procurement Bill 2025 and the move toward fiscal sustainability by implementing subsidy targeting show that the government is focusing on policy continuity and robust governance. And those are elements vital for attracting long-term capital. Meanwhile, the structural pivot toward high-value growth, driven by the NMP 2030 and the National Semiconductor Strategy, coupled with leading global efforts in ESG alignment through the NSRF and SRA Sukuk, positions them as a competitive, future-focused economy in a rapidly fragmenting world.
And the China story provides the necessary global context for their efforts. MIC 2025 shows the raw, compelling power of state-directed capitalism to create global champions, particularly where technology is horizontally integrated and scaling production quickly is key, like in electric vehicles. But where foundational research or established proprietary intellectual property forms a high barrier like in high-end aviation or CNC machines, the state apparatus is slowed down.
And that industrial might of China means regional economies like Malaysia must innovate structurally to compete, rather than just relying on cheap production or simple manufacturing. They have to play a specialized, high-value game in areas like ethical finance and advanced components to thrive.
So the greatest challenge facing Southeast Asian economies, including Malaysia, is not merely weathering today's tariffs, but determining how to structure their own long-term industrial policies, from AI to electric vehicles, to compete effectively with a manufacturing powerhouse like China that is aggressively exporting its massive overcapacity into the global market, potentially crushing smaller competitors before they even have a chance to scale.